Welcome to Section 3 of the Software Escrow Training module, brought to you by the Timbers Project. This section will outline the 3 phases of escrow. There are 3 phases in an escrow agreement. The first phase is planning. In the planning phase, the contracting parties have to agree on the terms of the contract and additionally specify the measurements that should be applied to identify the quality of the deposit material. The second phase is execution. The software developer has to deposit the source code and other relevant material at the escrow agent. It is important that iterations for the deposit are contractually established. The last escrow phase is redeployment. In this phase, the deposit material is released to the software licensee after one of the contractually established trigger events has occurred. It's characteristic for the planning phase that the different rights to the software artifact must be determined. It's important that the escrow agent is allowed to fulfill acts like reproduction and migration to be able to fulfill his contractually established obligations such as verification of deposited material. Hence, the transfer of rights to the escrow agent must be aligned with his contractually established obligations. If the software developer is allowed to use the deposit material as a backup in case of disaster, his rights to the material must also be clarified. For example, the software developer may be able to access the deposit material, or the escrow agent may be able to copy the material and send him this copy. It's also vital to clarify the legal consequences of releasing the material. The software user must know what he is allowed to do with the software, as well as any restrictions. As the source code of the software contains the know-how of the software developer, it is also advisable to let the user sign a confidentiality agreement and to determine any consequences in case of an infringement of this agreement. One of the most important steps in planning an escrow agreement is the selection of an escrow agent. It is important that the escrow agent is an independent third party in whom both the software developer and the software user can confide. It's also necessary to establish the requirements for the IT infrastructure and the data security which are provided by the escrow agent. The escrow agent has several information and notification obligations, which must be specified so that he knows who has to be informed in the event of defined circumstances. As the software license contract defines the rights of use for the software user, it must be aligned with the escrow agreement to avoid conflicts. It's therefore advisable to include basic escrow provisions in the license contract. The selection of the material for deposit is crucial to enable the user to undertake certain tasks when it is later handed over to him. It could allow him, for example, to do the debugging in case of errors in the program, or even to develop the software further when permission exists. During the execution phase of the escrow agreement, the deposit procedure must be determined to ensure that delays will not cause negative effects. The contract should therefore contain specific submission deadlines. As it is possible that updates of the software program will be developed, submission deadlines to deposit the new source code and other relevant material must also be included in the contract. The kinds of verification and procedures for verification by the escrow agent must also be determined. Therefore, it is important to know what the different types of verifications are and how much they cost, so that the user has the option of choosing the most suitable verification process for deposit material. The escrow agent has the obligation to inform both contracting parties about the results of the verification process, especially in case of a failure due to, for example, the lack of quality of the material. It is also important that the software user informs the escrow agent when he receives an update, because otherwise it could be very difficult for the escrow agent to become aware of its existence. The last phase of the escrow agreement is redeployment. The main task is to ensure that the deposit material is quickly released to the software user to minimize the downtime of the crucial business process for which the escrow agreement was signed. The material can only be released if one of the contractually established triggering events occurs. Therefore, it's very important that the trigger events are precisely determined in the planning phase. The escrow agreement also contains a release process. Normally, the software user informs the escrow agent of the occurrence of the releasing event. The escrow agent then has an obligation to notify the software developer to enable him to respond. The software developer has a predetermined period of time to reply. If he does not answer in time, or agrees with the occurrence of the triggering event, the escrow agent can release the deposit material. If the software developer denies the existence of the triggering event, the escrow agreement must also allow for the possibility of a voluntary arbitration or court judgment to reach a decision. It must be determined how the software user can prove the occurrence of the triggering event.